the idea that it's a two-way street, I don't disagree with that. I really do agree. But there are times when we as men need to step forward and say, okay, for the good of my household, for the good of my relationship, I'm going to pursue my wife in this.
So welcome to the True Man Podcast. Now, I'm really looking forward to diving into this topic today. Vulnerable or vulnerability, you can take your pick on the word there. That's a Latin word meaning injurious or wounding. Now, this is a really, really important word because in my experience, men will try to go through life just limping along and injured and wounded, and to some degree think that they can pull it off in life. But I'm sure today's guest agrees with me that it's difficult to do, if not impossible. So let's dig in here a little bit, see if we can unveil and learn something about vulnerability. So welcome to the podcast, Scott, better known as SJ Jennings. I've had the great opportunity to get to know Scott from an organization called Zoe, which is a nonprofit organization that encourages men and women and marriages by creating tools, resources, and community spaces that invite people to experience inner healing and intimate connections with God and others. I'm sure SJ will talk more about Zoe and what they're all about. SJ, welcome to the True Man Podcast.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's fun to be here. I know we've been trying to do this for a little while, so glad we finally pulled it off.
Well, it's always exciting. We had Michael on, so it's exciting to talk with my brothers at Zoe. Been part of my story. The weekends that you guys put on are phenomenal. I encourage everybody to go out to the website zoe.org and you can find some more information out about that. But those weekends are just incredible. They're life-changing. And you never know what you're going to learn about yourself on one of those weekends.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, in fact, that's probably part of your story too, right? Well, having one of those weekends available, and they're very, there's a lot of vulnerability on those weekends, but thanks for being here, SJ.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, and thank you. You were part of our intercessory prayer team at the last Encounter weekend, so thanks for stepping into that role. There's a day-to-day team here at Zoe of around a dozen folks, and but the Encounter weekend, for 421 men, you're looking at about 80 something guys on the conference team to pull that event off. And you were a part of that on the intercessory prayer team. So thanks for jumping into that role, man. I know God met you there.
Yeah. It's one thing. I sometimes tell people, I'm like, well, I go to these weekends selfishly because I want to hear from God. But, when you're in that role, that prayer role, there's really a lot more going on than meets the eye, people would suspect. And I find it to be an incredibly unselfish role where you're just, everything from having intentional prayer to walking around camp, just praying for everybody and everything around you. And it has really taken the experience to a whole other level for me. So I really enjoy it. And I thank you guys for having those things available, for men to get their hearts back and chase God. So talk about your story, SJ, a little bit. And how one of those weekends
turn the tables on you a little bit there. But so, man, how far back to start? I would say I went to my first Zoe weekend in 2009. And I was a layperson teacher at a church at the time, and kind of in a bit of a period of transition in my life. As often happens when you're right around 40 years old, things seem to start shifting in different ways. And a friend of mine invited me to go to the weekend, and man, I didn't even understand half of what they were saying. I just wanted to hear more of it, So I came back the next year, kept bringing guys from the church that I was associated with at the time. Ended up going on staff at the church as pastor of marriage and family life and associates pastor position. And they also gave me the reins to the men's initiatives and men's ministry there. So yeah, I just kept bringing guys back. And the funny thing was, I kind of started off in that role of just, a little bit of a Pied Piper. And it wasn't until it was probably 5 years in, God really stopped me in my tracks and said, okay, you and I need a little time together now. And so, yeah, I had a very, so in the interest of vulnerability, I didn't know I was going to tell this story, but I'm going to tell it. I was in a time of what we refer to as soaking prayer. This was in 2013. I was still working at the church at that time. And so I kept hearing this name over and over again in this time of soaking prayer, Abigail. Kept coming to me, and I have a niece named Abigail. So I was, not sure what was going on, hearing her voice or hearing her name. But I just kept hearing it. And during this time, there's kind of some, it's not full blown worship music. It's more contemplative, kind of quieter tone music. All the men are kind of sprawled out in the room. And I was sitting up in the back, all the way in the back. And I just keep hearing this name, Abigail. And so just to jump back a little bit further, I came to Christ in 2005 after a really tumultuous period of my life. I had just gone through a divorce from my wife, Sherry. We divorced on the day of our 14th wedding anniversary. And that came as a result of me self-medicating post-traumatic stress. I was a firefighter first responder for a number of years and did not know how to handle that. The culture of the fire services and the law enforcement at the time was, if you see hard things, and I'm talking about, children who have perished and things that are hard to deal with. If that is traumatizing to you in some way, then you must not be cut out for the job. So it led to a culture of the opposite of vulnerability. It led to this idea of you can't talk about it, or you can't take the heat. Obviously, you're not cut out for it. So I internalized all of these traumatic experiences, and I start turning to alcohol and prescription drugs and women to try to medicate my post-traumatic stress, which I wouldn't have called it that at the time, but I was hallucinating, full-on hallucinations, and having a really hard time. So intentionally entered into a couple of adulterous affairs. And so that resulted in my wife and I getting divorced. So I say all that because in 2004, the woman that I was engaged with became pregnant, and not knowing what else to do, she didn't want to have another child. And so I took her to the clinic and paid for the abortion. And while she went inside, I sat in the truck and, with a bottle in my hand, trying not to think about what was going on inside. So I'll go back now to 2013. I'm sitting in the chair in the back of the auditorium, and I keep hearing this name, Abigail, and I don't understand why God keeps bringing this name to me. So I seek out what we refer to as medics at the weekend. They're men who are trained to listen well, ask good questions, pray with men as they're trying to process through some of the wounds and the difficulties that they've experienced or might be going through currently. So I seek out this medic, and his name's Blake, great guy. I'll never forget him. Sat down, just started telling him my story like I just told you. And I can't remember if he suggested it or if it just came to me, but I remember bursting into tears, sobbing uncontrollably, because the revelation was, this is the name of my daughter.
Oh.
Yeah. So Yeah, let me just tie that together. So 2004, I came to Christ in 2005 as a result of our divorce. I had nowhere else to turn. I turned to Jesus. Come fast forward to 2013, he meets me in the back of the room at one of these encounter weekends and tells me the name of the daughter that I had, that I paid for the abortion for. So I just can't believe that he would do that, that he would meet me in my sin with just this um, unbelievable forgiveness, love, understanding, comfort, release. And so I've been carrying that around for going on 9 years at that point. And so I just am uncontrollably letting all that out. And finally started to take some breaths and calm down some. And I remember, Mike, I walked outside. If you remember, you leave the meeting room and you kind of go up a hill to the dining hall.
Yep.
And there's you can see the valley that the camp is in out there.
Yep.
And I looked out into the valley as I walked out, just emotionally exhausted, but free in that moment. And God showed me that I had been in a prison that I had kept myself in. Nobody had put me in that prison but me. This prison of unforgiveness, this prison of even denial of what I had done, and denial of God's love to overcome what I had done. So yeah, that the weekends are powerful, even for those of us who are just trying to get guys there. God can really sneak up on you. So yeah, I want to say too, before you ask me another question, because I know you might have one. My wife and I got remarried about a year and a half after we got divorced, because he just brought us back together. And I know he doesn't do that for everybody, but that is a part of our story.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with all that story, SJ. I was familiar with the divorce that you and Sherry went through, and I mean, it's God's grace, man. God's grace is so incredible. And hearing you tell that story, it was five. Part of the reason I really wanted to get back there this year was it was 5 years ago that I went on my first retreat, and the amount of information that came out of that then, and I mean, that is still coming out to this day is incredibly powerful. But the thing, as you were telling your story, that I think is so powerful, and this is what I think a lot of men don't understand, is that our story matters, and those weekends where you can make those connections is so doggone powerful, because leaving that stuff down, as Rocky says, in the basement is just such a shallow way to live. Talk about how freeing it is to be able to have that intimate relationship with Christ that comes out of those weekend getaways where you can I guess dig deep and learn what God's got for you.
And I would say too, the weekends certainly are catalytic in nature. But man, one of the things we're hopeful for most at the Encounter weekends is that we're trying to teach guys that they can live this way. You really don't. There is something about getting away, getting unplugged, being that focused on connecting with God and intimacy with Him and with other guys in your small groups and that. But you really can live this way. And so, to that point, it was about 3 years later, 2016, is when I joined the team full time. Sherry and I joined the team full time with Zoe, and we were at a advanced weekend in December. And the advanced weekend is exactly that. It's just kind of advanced training. You have way more time to get into your stories with
Yeah.
small groups. The men, you break into groups of 3 or 4, and I'm at that weekend, and it's my birthday. And so the guys circle me up and get me. They find out carrot cake is my favorite, and so that I had a carrot cake, and somebody had stuck a cigar in it instead of a candle, because I have a cigar now and again. And so it was great. But then, Michael Thompson asked me a question. He said, so, wrapping up this year, looking forward to the next, what's God showing you? And I don't always have the experience where God will bring me a word of the year. I don't like to put that pressure on myself. Every year I got to listen, and God will give me, when he brings them to me, he brings them to me. Well, in that year, he brought the word vulnerability.
Yeah.
And so I shared that with Michael and the other guys there. And they were like, really? Vulnerability is your word, because I think immediately their reaction was, love you, SJ, but you're not the most vulnerable guy. I was pretty guarded still then. And yeah, I think there's just a visceral response from men in general, like the vulnerable. Who wants to be vulnerable? That's leaving myself open to being hurt. It's leaving myself open to being wounded. All of these things. And I was like, I know, I get it. I don't want it as a word either, but I engaged in an exploration of the word and some other folks that have done some teaching on the subject. And I've just found out that vulnerability is, it is risky, and it does require courage.
What's more risky, living with vulnerability or living without vulnerability?
Right. And I think that's the Kierkegaard quote, right? Life can only be lived forward, but can only be understood looking backward. So, looking backward, I would say it's definitely more risky, more dangerous, more painful, to live a life that's where you're trying to lock yourself away, and not and keep yourself from being hurt. There's that I don't have it in front of me, but there's a quote from C.S. Lewis where he talks about locking your heart away to protect it from all entanglements and all emotion and all risk of relationship. But in that casket, dark and alone, your heart will die. Your heart will cease to exist. And I think, the risk involved with not sharing, I think we're seeing a lot of the evidence of it. I think we're seeing a lot of, suicide rates are higher than ever. People are lonelier, more isolated, more depressed than ever before. And I think it's directly tied to this idea that we've been sold a bill of goods that's just false. Which is, and look, man, I think our father's generation was taught the same thing. We've just had just come through Memorial Day weekend. I think about those men and those women that came back and were told never to talk about what they saw ever again, because it would be too hard for the families and friends that you had at home to hear about that. And so they suffered in silence their whole life, and it was demonstrated to so many of us, that same behavior. And so, I love talking about vulnerability, as you can tell, Mike. I'm not letting you talk very much, but
I'd rather hear from you on this subject.
But I'm telling you, man, I think it's the key that unlocks intimacy, and intimacy is a scary thing. Intimacy is a risky thing, and but if you are not known, if you are not either allowed, or if you're not arranging for the opportunity to share your story and to be known, then your heart is like that heart that C.S. Lewis talked about, and it's just going to wither in its cage, in its casket.
I got to say, I think for many guys, intimacy is a new thing. It's not something
Yeah.
that they knew was even available. I mean, I've been
Hmm.
a Christian all my life, and um, I didn't really understand that connection. What I didn't know that being uh intimate with Christ was the thing until he said, I'd kind of like that relationship with you if that's okay. And I'm like, well,
Hmm.
that sounds like a good deal to
Hmm.
me. And
Yeah.
I have to say, life has not been the same since I came to that realization. In fact, I
Mm.
would uh seriously doubt that you and I would be sitting here talking today. There's no doubt I wouldn't have a podcast because I wouldn't be able to talk about this stuff publicly. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
sure there's a lot of people
Hmm.
that just heard your story and went, "Whoa." But, I believe it's that vulnerability and that intimacy that comes with the relationship where, it becomes part of the story. And the beautiful part about it is doing what you're doing what I'm doing, is when we tell those stories, people know they're not walking alone. Because
Right.
the other side to that story is we all think, "Oh, well, my story's unique to me. I don't want to tell anybody." And the reality
Hmm.
is there are guys walking around everywhere. They're going through the exact same thing.
Hmm. Yep.
And that's,
Yep.
the importance of those stories. In fact, I had to laugh. There was at this last encounter weekend, we talked not just about the father wound, but we talked about the mother wound. And I was telling you a story when we talked a while back. Tom, one of the speakers, was telling his story, and then Michael came up and and I made some connections there. And I'll be doggone if and what was interesting about this encounter was you guys did something different. You decided, well, we're going to team up. You have a partner after this.
Yeah.
And
For time alone with God.
yeah,
Yeah.
time alone
Hmm.
with God. And I had met a gentleman at breakfast that morning, never met the guy in my life. And so you teed this up for at breakfast in the morning. Hey, comes that time, we're gonna go 2 by 2, like
Hmm.
the ark, I guess. And we're gonna go 2 by 2. And so he turns around to me. So it shocked me a little bit. He goes, "Hey,
Yeah.
you want to partner up when that happens?" I'm like, "Sure." And we go out, and he starts to tell me his story, and I'm telling you, my jaw's on the ground, and I'm like, "What?
Yeah.
You too? Like, are you kidding me?" And we had the greatest conversation back and
Oh
forth.
yeah.
But
Oh yeah.
it's almost like a release knowing, "Oh man, I'm not the only one, really?"
Yeah.
You know? Oh,
100%, man. And when it comes down to the fine details, of course, every story is unique. But the similarities between us are probably more greater in number than we would imagine. I think one of the tools that the enemy uses more than any other is isolation. Um, because isolation is quickly followed by shame and guilt.
oh yeah.
If I'm the only one, then what's wrong with me? Because certainly there can't be anything wrong with God. So it's got to be someone's fault. It's probably my fault. And so the shame and guilt that comes quickly behind that really just self perpetuates this idea that you're on your own and you got to figure it out because you screwed it up. And so the moment that we say, you know what, man, if somebody doesn't want to have anything to do with me from here on out, I don't care anymore. I just need to share what's going on in my life. And it's such a brave moment for any man to engage in that and risk freedom, risk the opportunity to be known. It's such a great, brave, courageous moment. Yeah.
A relief.
Hmm.
a relief. I
Mhm.
think we carry these things around with us. We just carry things around and we wonder.
Yeah.
And I would love to sit here and tell you that, well, that this is a conversation I could have with my wife in that moment. But in that moment where I'm trying to figure out what relief looks like, I couldn't. And
Mhm.
it was amongst my peers or amongst men
Mhm.
in a
Mhm.
small group that we started where I started to break these things down. In fact, really early on, before we even knew about Zoe, so we have to plug our
Yeah.
my good friend Haynes Maxwell, who
Oh, yeah, the barn.
of course, found Paul Bailey and myself out on the trail, wandering around trying to figure it out, and Haynes,
He
like he
does
does,
that.
makes all these connections.
Yeah.
You should come to
Yeah.
the barn. You should go
Right.
to Zoe. But
Yeah.
it was we went down the trail that a lot of guys would go down. We started doing the Eldridge, the Wild at Heart stuff, and that just
Mhm.
began to unclog so much for me. Was
Mhm.
like, wow, that's what we're built for. I always wondered why this or that,
Mhm.
and you start
Mhm.
to make all these connections and gosh, the value of those groups. And that's something that you guys at Zoe do is such a great job of supporting. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you support men's groups and that type of thing, SJ.
Yeah, I would say, Ben, it's a crucial part of what we do. It's we're in them. It's not just something that
Not a hobby.
we're proponents of. We're actually, actually, we're not a, what's that, the hair club guy. I'm not not just the president.
Clearly,
I'm
I don't
also a
know about the
client.
hair club guy.
Yeah, I'm not just the president. I'm also a client. I mean, it really is. A crucial thing. But the way that we like to support men's small group is just being available.
Yeah.
We're available to men if they're having a hard time getting a group going, if they're having a hard time finding a group. Send me an email, Scott@zoe.org. Send Michael an email, Michael@zoe.org, and we'll, our younger brother, Josh Overton, who joined the team about a year or so ago, he and his wife, Brooke, Josh@zoe.org. Send us an email. Get it. We want to get you connected. And then we want to encourage, equip, and deploy you because, yeah, way more men need the opportunity
Oh,
to have a space where they can open their hearts and find some relief. Like you said, I love that, Mike. Find some relief from this, whatever it is. And it could just be that they haven't had an opportunity to share their story. No one's ever
oh
listened to
yeah.
them. You know, I can't tell you the number of times in medical appointments that I've done over the years where a man looks at me and says, "I've never told anyone this before."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's like, you want to take your shoes off, because that's a holy moment.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really is. So yeah, just supporting guys as they're trying to walk through what that looks like, creating that environment that's safe for men to share.
Listen, it's so important it's funny. I was going through my emails uh before you and I hopped on to record this, and I got an email from some other uh guy who says he works with men, but he wanted to know my experience with the marriage side of the equation, which I found kind of funny. Yeah, that's pretty much all of it, right? The relationship and one
Hmm.
of the things that I really noticed from this last retreat that we had in Virginia versus last fall, we had one in Georgia, was
Hmm.
tremendous amount of prayer requests came in this fall or the spring, and almost 80% of them outside of a guy who had, a health issue or whatever, wanted prayers for relationship
Yeah. Yeah.
relationships. And I think there's so much to be gained by men being with each other to learn about relationships. I think we all agree women are a mystery anyway. And so So the best way to survive all that is amongst ourselves, learning from each other. I mean,
Right.
I found just tremendous strength in learning from other men in these groups.
Hmm.
Whether it's a Bible study group or going through something like one of Michael's books.
Hmm.
Michael Thompson has three books now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Search and Rescue, Heart of a Warrior, and King Me. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I get my stuff and his stuff mixed up at this point.
Yeah.
I actually started to read his new book, King Me, and I thought, Mike, you're gonna have to put this aside for fear I may plagiarize something as I was writing. Yeah, true story. I stopped
Hey.
reading books while I was writing. So true man, true ways to be out this fall. So
Okay. Great.
I'm sure it'll be earth shattering information for everybody.
It'll
But
be great.
yeah, but maybe you could talk about
Yeah.
Michael's books as well, and how you utilize them as a resource, or maybe some of the other resources that you guys have at Zoe. I think it's really important. I try to make this stuff as available to the audience as I can, so they know where to go. I kind of consider myself a curator of information.
Yeah.
But
That's great, man. That's great. I love that. And yeah, we all need that for sure, right? A place to go, a source. Um, but yeah, I mean, as you bring up the mystery that our brides are for those of us that are married, I would say, yeah, as risky as it is to be vulnerable in a group of men,
oh,
it can be really risky to be vulnerable with your wife. But I would say, so much depends on where she is in her journey
yeah,
and how she is able to process and handle what you would want to share. It's a good idea to talk to good men before you would engage in some of those conversations with her, perhaps. I have found that to be helpful.
I agree. That's great
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. But I will also say that if you could somehow dive into your wife's heart and get back through all of
Mm,
the wounds she's experienced, the trauma that she's experienced, if you could get through the ways that men and probably you as her husband have hurt her,
yeah.
and get back to her into her truest heart of hearts, she longs for you to be vulnerable with her. Her deepest desire is intimacy with you, and one of the most incredible ways, and I think it might be the way to do that, to foster intimacy, to grow intimacy, to encourage intimacy in your relationship with your wife, is for you to be, as a man, vulnerable with her. Now, again, caveat to that, you got to be careful, right? Don't
Yeah.
just say, hey, SJ and Mike said that I was supposed to be vulnerable, so bleh, here it all
Here
is.
come the emails.
Oh man, don't be careful, right? Be careful. But I would say, if my bride Sherry was sitting right here next to me, who, she's my wife and my ex-wife. Um, you know, she remembers the time before when we were completely closed off from one another
Yeah.
and really living separate lives. Um, and and as scary as some of the things that I've been vulnerable with her about, some of my challenges, some of the trauma that I've experienced, as scary as some of that is for her to hear, she would tell you we have never been closer, because we've been vulnerable with one another. So it's it's a journey to get there. There's no doubt. And you got to be careful. There's no doubt. One of the resources I would encourage you to check out is called the Rendezvous Project.
Yep.
We created, it's a video series, 13 sessions, comes with a workbook. You stream the videos online. They're about 30 minutes long. And it just promotes not just intimacy between the two of you, but awareness, right? There's some training in there about what's going on around us. The two realms, two kingdoms, right? There's a physical realm, there's a spiritual realm, and they're at war over your heart. And the Holy Trinity, the unholy Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
Satan, the world, and the flesh, and they are at war over your heart. So understanding where you are in the context of the struggles that you might be going through is important. And then it really does a deep dive into that idea of sharing intimately and vulnerably through what's called the story timeline, which I know you're familiar with, Mike, but
Yeah.
it goes decade by decade, prompts you to share your story with one another. And just as a plug for the idea, we had a couple come to a rendezvous event that we did that was kind of a hybrid. Sherry and I did some speaking, but we also showed the video content. They'd been married more than 40 years. And at the end of the event, we kind of passed the microphone around, what was impactful to you. And the guy, through tears, said, I learned things about my wife this weekend I'd never heard in 40 plus years. So there's, she risked being vulnerable with him. So yeah, I think that's a great resource. When it comes to small groups and men, the Heart of a Warrior is a great place to start because it talks about identity. I've had guys actually tell me they were frustrated because the first, 6, 7 chapters or so are all about belovedness. It's belovedness. You're a beloved son.
Yeah.
You are the beloved. Jesus died for you, and you're his beloved son. It's like, okay, I get it. And it's almost like, no, I don't think you do. I don't think you do.
Bears
You need to hear it
repeating.
more, right? But really, man, if you don't understand your identity and who you are and whose you are, you enter into the battlefield at a severe disadvantage.
Oh, man.
And many of us have fought bravely and died quickly on the battlefield because we didn't know, how to stand in our identity and the power and the authority that Jesus Christ has given us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like having the wind knocked out of you. You're just kind of laying on the floor going, "Are you done yet?" Right?
Yeah, man, for sure.
No, SG, thanks for that advice. I think it's valuable advice. Our wives, girlfriends, all the women in our life, even our mothers, it's so important to know what line do you need to walk here as you're trying to not just win your heart back, but it's important to know that they've gone through some stuff too, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so it's really a two-way street. But like any good relationship, if you could level the playing field and get on each other's page, man, you're just going to come out, as I'm sure you agree, in such better shape. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I agree, Mike, wholeheartedly. It is a two-way street, and I would say I would challenge the men listening to your podcast and say that they are they're ordained as the leader of their homes, and so as the leader of your home, who was it? Churchill, who said a leader without anybody following them is just a guy taking a walk. I don't know. I just butchered that quote, but if you're the leader,
came out really good.
if you're leading the leader of your home, right? And everybody, I've talked to. I try not to roll my eyes when guys bring up Ephesians chapter 5. Wives, submit to your husband. Okay, hang on. Would you submit to you? Hang on a second. But, so going back to my original thought, it is a two-way street for sure. But as the leader of your home, I just want to encourage you men who are listening, and, I'll encourage myself as well. There's times where you need to make that a one-way street and just walk the way that she's walking and walk with her a
Yeah.
while. And, rather than digging your heels in and saying, no, it's, you have to come this way. You've got to work on it too, because if you're not working on it, then, then it's not going to work. I would tell you again, in all vulnerability and humility, the reason I'm sitting here and talking to you today, Mike, is because my wife prayed for me when I was living with another woman.
Yeah.
And prayed for the restoration of our marriage and prayed for my salvation. She took Ephesians chapter 5, which talks about husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church, so on and so forth. And she took husbands out and put my name in there. Scott, love your wife the way Christ loved the church. And that's how she would pray for me while I was living with a girlfriend. So the idea that it's a two-way street, I don't disagree with that. I really do agree. But there are times when we as men need to step forward and say, okay, for the good of my household, for the good of my relationship, I'm going to pursue my wife in this.
Yeah.
And walk the way that she's walking. And we'll get to me being able to share my point of view and my story. But I need to pursue my wife to get to that place where I can do that.
Totally fair. In fact, that's a great idea. I do that right now, but she's at work.
Yeah.
Scott, thanks so much for coming on the True Man podcast and telling your story and talking a little bit about Zoe. I just it's such a great organization, and so it is a part of my story. Every time I tell my story and talk about kind of the things that have transpired in my life, Zoe's a part of that. Zoe's a part of that.
Thanks,
and
man.
That spring Saturday morning 5 years ago, I'll never forget how that played out. So I'm so appreciative of the organization and Michael and just all you guys. Just enjoy being around you and getting around you. And so just thank you. That's what I would say.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And the feeling's mutual, Mike. It's always great to hang out with you, man. I do want to say one more thing. I just realized the shirt that I'm wearing, as I looked at my own image here, and it's dangerous for good, right? Is it something that we've been promoting?
Yeah.
We believe that that men have it in them to be dangerous, and often that doesn't go so well. I've done some things and been dangerous to my wife and my kids and things like that, right? That whole just was telling the story the other day. My son's 29, he's about to get married in November, and I was telling the story of one time I was just doing that dad thing when I was talking at him through my teeth, like, and you just think about it when they're 6 years old or whatever. That's scary as can be. I'm 6'4", I'm not a small guy. So we've been dangerous. And but the idea behind DFG is that you can be dangerous for good, the way that Jesus was. And we've got some events coming up soon. If you go to zoe.org and just look up DFG, you can find those. What we found, Mike, was for some men it's a tough lift to go away for 3.5 days and $400. So we're bringing a 4-session event out into different communities and calling them Dangerous for Good summits, so that men can get a taste of what we're talking about and then enter into small groups and hopefully start sharing vulnerably with other guys. So
so important, the work you guys are doing. I had to laugh because as you were talking about your shirt there, I was recalling that you and Michael were doing a podcast. This was last fall. And we had just dropped my daughter off at school in Missouri and drove back. And I'm like, I got to get out. Now that I'm out of the car, I got to go for a walk. And I'm listening to the podcast, and you guys are talking about danger, being dangerous for good. But mostly you were talking about danger. And I had this moment where I was like walking and I'm like, dangerous. I just dropped my daughter off at school 7.5 hours down the road. Like my eyes just started like, what did I do? What did I do? So you never know when those moments are going to hit. Scott, how, just real quick, and we'll put this in the show notes, how can people get a hold of you again and maybe get a hold of Zoe if they want to?
Yeah, Scott at Zoe Networks. Email if you got questions. Zoe.org. All the information's there. Our stores there where you can get discounts on books and things like that. Heart of a Warrior, King Me, other resources. There's the Heart of a Warrior journal workbook. If you've already gone through the Heart of a Warrior as a group, going back through the journal workbook as a group is a great idea. Look up the Dangerous for Good men's summits that are coming. The first one, shout out to my Ohio brethren, is August 2nd and 3rd. John Stackler, Sean Harmon, Frank Crockett, all those guys.
Guys are expanding in Ohio. My God.
Oh man, yeah. But that's August 2nd and 3rd in Xenia, Ohio, which is the site of the AIA facility there. So we're excited. That's our first big DFG event. So anyway, check that out. It'd be great.
Awesome. SJ, thank you for being on today. So appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right. Take care.
And the opportunity to be vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. Go do it today.
Okay.